Hi and welcome to Thete Gaming, and with the 3rd edition core rules out now for Age of Sigmar, I thought I'd do a little series of my thoughts around certain themes in the run-up to the release, or at least release for those of us lucky enough to get one of the not enough copies of the game at release. And there are an awful lot of new rules. This is arguably the biggest shake-up in rules that I've personally experienced since the transition from 5th to 6th edition Fantasy Battle. Except it wouldn't be as big a shake-up as from Fantasy Battle to Age of Sigmar. But one, I wasn't around for that, and two, it's two different games, even though one disappeared at the same time as one emerged. But they are absolutely seismic changes. I was quite shocked. It's like, see, I wasn't around for 1st edition because I returned to the hobby just as 2nd edition came out. But I've still got some of the old battle tomes. So 1st edition, couple of pages. You know, 2nd edition, a little booklet that you get in the sets. 3rd edition's like 40 pages. And it's properly laid out now. It's properly laid out. And these changes are going to completely reset the strategic approach to a lot of aspects of Age of Sigmar. But in this first video, what I'm going to do is discuss some of the changes in tactical thinking regarding the new core command abilities. You know, so we're getting more command points to spend now, as well as some very interesting command abilities. Beyond the ones we get in our battle tomes and beyond the core ones that already existed. And the first one is Rally. Yes, so roll a d6 for each model slain in any friendly unit. It has to be more than 3 inches from an enemy unit, so you can't just use it to bolster one that's currently in combat. But roll a d6 for each one that's been slain. On a 6, you can return one of those slain models with no limit on how many you can bring back with this. So you have a bruising encounter with, say, I mean, as I had this week, the battle report will be coming out on Saturday. Unit of 30 witch elves, they're completely buggered. You know, you have like 20 odd destroyed. Roll some d6s for each one slain. On a 6, you bring them back. You could bring like 4 back, maybe on average. And you know, that's you've got some back in your command phase to either get moving back into the fray. You know, those bolstered up to the point where they could actually do some damage again, or just move towards an objective. I think this is going to be a commonly used ability. Could even be used in desperation for smaller units or where you've had fewer killed, just to, you know, see if you get lucky. But death and destruction armies, I think, are going to be using this quite a lot, you know. And as with any similar rules already in existence, when you're adding slain models back to a unit, as I say, you can train them a little bit towards key objectives and steal a march. Obviously, new coherency rules, which mirror those in the new 40k edition, means it's not like a long conga line anymore. You can't do that. But you can still train them out a little bit towards an area of interest. Or just to get closer towards a charge, for example, move towards the thing you want to get a charge on so that when your movement phase, you get closer to it still so you can have a good charge. But you can really make the use of this, not just to bolster a force for another attack, but to get more bodies near an objective, to get more bodies nearer the unit you want to move towards. Yeah, tactically useful as well. The next new ability is Redeploy. This is the big one for me. This is huge. But I don't know whether it's good or bad yet. It could be either. I'll try and explain. So you use it in the enemy movement phase. So when your opponent has moved a unit, if you have a unit within 9 inches of that unit when it's moved, but more than 3 inches away from all enemy units, you can spend a command point to move your unit d6 inches. Now that can be used for all sorts of things. That can be used to move yourself away from an unwelcome charge. I think that would be the most common use. Someone's wanting to move towards you to get a charge on you. I'm going to move away. I don't want you charging me. Now I can see good and bad here. Good because it means players can play more aggressively with the safety net of a possible move back. Age of Sigmar, especially with the fear of the double turn, can mean some players in some situations will be a little bit cagey. You know, and because they don't want to let their opponent choose all the charges because then they're choosing the combats. Something like this allows you to move things up the board with that little safety net of, if I don't get my charge off, well, I can make it tricky for them to get their charge off as well. So even if your opponent moves within 3 inches of you, in that situation, normally you only fail the charge on a double one. And of course, if it's a crucial charge, that's what you get. But, you know, only a double one will fail that charge. But you move back and it suddenly turns it into, on average, a 6 or 7 inch charge needed. And if you get lucky, a 9-inch charge on your roll, even with a re-roll, it's like about 50-50 then, from almost certain to about 50-50. And then there's the bad. It makes charges harder to get off. Now, anything that makes charges harder to get off is strategically interesting, but it eliminates entire combat phases from the game. And then there's a real risk it makes the game more boring because there's lots of moving around the board, not as much actual fighting. In addition, and this is where I'm going to have to moan about the double turn again, what gets me is not only it's still a thing, and in match play as well, although I haven't seen the match play rules, I gather it is still in matched play. But Games Workshop keep behaving as if you'd want to go first. You don't. In 40k, I mean, have they given 40k gamers the rules here? In 40k, yeah, because if you go first in 40k, I'm not saying you always want to go first, but a lot of the time you do, because if you go first in 40k, you've got a chance to use your shooting, especially if you've got heavy artillery to bombard your opponent. You have a good chance to actually destroy one or two of their units before they're even used. You can sometimes have a game, not quite decide in the first turn, but heavily swing one way. If both sides have got some, heavy artillery, one player goes first, destroys two of their tanks. Those tanks now can't be used. So they have less firepower to do the same back. Not the case in Age of Sigmar. Not the case. You would almost never choose to go first. I'm not going to say you would never choose to go first. There might be the odd situation, but you would almost never choose to go first. And yet choosing to go second, which is already the default, now gives you with an extra command point. So if you're forced to go first, not only will you play in constant dread of the double turn and you're a command point down, but your only hope lay in an alpha strike to take out or at least severely weaken a key enemy unit. Now, I've sometimes done that with a Terrorgeist or Marathi, for example, but there's an element of luck. You move up the board and you give yourself, say, a medium range charge. You're not moving up within 3 inches or something. Maybe you even need an 8 or a 9, particularly if you can teleport in or come in from reserve. And you may even give yourself a command point for a reroll because you're more likely to be able to do that now. That's easier to do. Well, now your opponent can just move d6 inches back and your charge is certainly less likely and maybe even impossible. So now you've put your hopes in the alpha strike, which was already risky, but now you're stranded. You get nothing from your first turn. Your opponent basically got that move for free because they got an extra command point. So it was like it cost them nothing. And they might get a double turn now. Fun times. So it's an interesting ability, but the interplay with other rules could actually mean that it's an overall bad ability. Not in itself, but in the impact. But there are other possibilities as well. It's really interesting. Like you could potentially use it not to get away from a charge, because that's the obvious use. You could be fine with the charge, or you could be accepting the charge that's going to happen. But you could use it to direct the charge. You might want to use that move to get towards an objective. Maybe you're going to be charged by something that's like just a hero or something like that. Not a lot of models is what I mean. And you're thinking, but I could use this move to get myself close to that objective. And you could use that to block them from taking that objective. So by them moving into a position where they could declare a charge on you, it doesn't matter whether they charge or not, this is in the movement phase. You could use the opportunity to move in their movement phase towards an objective, getting enough bodies near an objective while still staying 3 inches away from any models they've got around that objective to make sure your opponent can't capture. Their opponent may have already captured that objective. You're going to stop them. You're going to take it off them and stop them scoring in their turn. Interesting. But you could do it the opposite. You might use it to move towards an objective as long as you'd still be more than 3 inches away. But you might do it the other way around. You could think to yourself, they're going to try and charge me. That's quite a big unit. That would then get, because at the moment you might hold the objective. Then you look at it and your opponent would be able to use the charge and then the subsequent pile-in to get more models onto that objective and thereby capture the objective. So they may be charging you as a tactical move to get the objective. So then you think, well, I need to bait them away. So then you use your move to move away from the objective. If you don't mind the charge, you might even move towards that unit, give them an easier charge, but away from the objective. Or if you think it would make the charge all but impossible, you just move away from it so that you're still in range of that objective. But remember, in Age of Sigmar, if you move off an objective, you still control it until your opponent takes it off you, so you can safely move off it. So yeah, bait a charge away from an objective. So many tactical possibilities. Absolutely love the concept of it, but I just can't help but worry about the negative things it brings to it. So for me, the jury's out on that one. But on the theme of charges, and stand and shoot is back with interest as well, because enemy unit finishes a charge move. Doesn't have to be into the shooting unit, just within 9 inches of it. As long as you don't have any other enemy units within 3 inches of you, you can shoot at the charging unit with a -1 to hit. A little bit like the redeploy ability. It adds a very nice dynamic into the game. It's giving you reactions to making your opponent's turn other than rolling dice. But just like with redeploy, it can potentially dissuade players from making charges, so reduces the number of combats in the game. After all, if you need a longish charge, you might fail it, but you still have to pick the arrows out of your face. Similar to Overwatch in 40k, you think to yourself, you think about, except in 40k, of course, unless it's like flamer type weapons where you are definitely getting a smash in the face, you think to yourself, well, what have they actually got? They've got to hit on 6s, that sort of thing in most cases. In this particular case, you're -1 to hit, but you could still end up with a lot of arrows in your face. So you're thinking about the damage you'll be taking. If you don't even get the charge off, all you've done is given your opponent a free round of shooting. Is it worth the volley of missiles? Are you confident of getting the charge? So it may put some people off making charges, which again eliminates some combats from the game, which again makes the game more boring. But in this case, I don't think the negatives are anything like as impactful as redeploy, although I've given hypothetical situations there that will come up now and then. They won't necessarily come up a lot. So I still think this is a good one. Also helps raise the profile of shooting units a bit. Flamers of Cinch won't even mind the -1 if it's against a large unit, like say a big block of goblins or something, because they get +2 to hit against units of 20 or more. Well, they're not going to in 3rd edition, because the new rules mean you can never get more than a plus or -1 to hit or wound. So yeah, against a big unit, the Flamers are good with that. I'll get +2, you've knocked it down, so I'm still getting me +1. They're fine with that. The combat and shooting phase command abilities are boring in terms of what they do. They're not tactical as such, but they are clearly beneficial as a result. You know, you can give yourself you can give yourself +1 to hit, and there's another one that gives you +1 to save. Or you can do both, the different command abilities, I guess. Allows you to spend resources on a particularly important unit or tactical objective. So there is a nice selection of new command abilities in order to still demand some careful thought as to how to spend command points. Because if it was just, you now get more command points now. Initially, of course, what we were thinking, or you would do, is, well, that's great. So now I can spend these ones a bit more freely. Let's say Flesh Eater's Courts, for example, as it was before. I mean, the game I played, I'd bought a command point. That's quite common for me because I don't have any battalion, so I can start with 2. Well, I want to spend 2 on summoning straight away, but then that doesn't give me 1 to reroll a charge if I need it. So there's always a bit of umming and ahhing. Whereas now I could do all of that, but the fact that there are also newer command abilities means that raises the value of a command point higher again. It's not made them cheap because there's now more to do with the command points. So maintains the value of them. And they are going to massively change the way we think about the game strategically, because you can see it coming. You know, as people start to play our first games, there's going to be missteps when we fall into the 2nd edition mode, strategic mode, and think, bugger, yeah. And I think that aspect of it is interesting, because if you're going to have a new edition, yes, it's the same game, but there's, you know, and there is, of course, scope for just tidying up messy rules. But if that's all it is it really worth a new edition? This edition has delivered on its promise, reading the core rules, to lay things out more clearly. It's done that. You know, it has done that. There are still some things I think need FAQing. There are still a few little ambiguities, but by and large, it's a lot tidier. And I think it is a new edition worthy of the name because there's so much different now. You know, it's not the same game played in the same way. It's the same game played in a very different way. So I think despite my misgivings about how a couple of these abilities might, in some situations, they could actually just make the game less fun. That is essentially down to their interplay with other aspects of the game that I think are wrong. Most notably the double turn, but not just that. The new approach to command abilities, and I think the abilities themselves are good. They are a good addition. But those are my thoughts on that now. I think I may do magic and priestry next. Maybe. But until then, I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe. And until next time, I'll see you later.